Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to raise the important issue of the conflict in Tigray. It's the first time the House has had an opportunity to debate the conflict, which has, since last November, devastated Tigray, the mountainous region in the north of Ethiopia. I have given the Minister's Office advance sight of the questions I will be asking him at the end of my speech. There are many in the UK and beyond who will be listening very carefully to what he has to say. The conflict started in retaliation to an attack on the Northern Command by the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. The Ethiopian federal government cut off all links into the region, closed roads, shut down communications, and sent its troops to surround Mekelle. We know that in addition to Ethiopian armed forces, Eritrean forces and Amharan militias are now also present in Tigray. Since November, over 60,000 Tigrayan people have fled into refugee camps in Sudan. Some are reported to have had their exit routes blocked by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. About 1 million people, some sources put the figure higher, have been internally displaced. 4.5 million people have become food insecure. Crops have been destroyed, livestock killed, and agriculture disrupted. Tigray is an area of chronic food insecurity. It's the scene of the devastating 1984 to 1985 famine. So deliberately cutting it off from food supplies and markets, as the Ethiopian government is alleged to have done, means people will starve. Yet up to 80% of the region is still inaccessible. Some of Tigray's and the world's most precious cultural heritage sites have been destroyed and priceless treasures looted. 70% of health facilities are reported to have been looted or vandalised by Ethiopian and Eritrean government forces, including very recently the only specialist clinic providing care to rape victims in Mekelle. Schools have been taken out of commission, used for housing troops or displaced people. 2 refugee camps at Hitsats and Shimelba have been razed to the ground. The whereabouts of 20,000 of the refugees they sheltered is still unknown. An estimated 50,000 civilians have been killed, with evidence that children have been targeted. And 10,000 women have been raped. Let that sink in. 10,000 women have been raped. The most terrible update from the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported continuing human rights abuses, severe malnutrition among young children, and a food security situation described as catastrophic. In considering this catalogue of destruction, I want to focus on 3 points. One is the nature of the conflict, the second is the use of rape as a weapon of war, and the third is the lack of action by the international community. Firstly, the nature of the conflict. The Ethiopian government originally said that the attack on Tigray was a law and order operation to deal with a long-running dispute, but multiple subsequent reports indicate a sustained and brutal assault that has included aerial bombardment and ground shelling of settlements with the deliberate targeting of civilians. This is not a little local difficulty in Ethiopia's backyard. It risks a much wider destabilisation and escalation of conflict throughout the Horn of Africa. Early information trickling out through the refugee camps in Sudan told right from the start of massacres of civilians. At Mai Kadra, where responsibility is hotly contested, witnesses have spoken of both Ethiopian government and Tigrayan militia involvement. Most notably, last November, there was a brutal massacre at Aksum, one of the holiest Christian sites in Ethiopia. A total of 750 people are thought to have been killed. The stories circulating last year on social media were confirmed last month by Amnesty International in a report that documents aerial bombardment by Ethiopians, followed by a systemic killing by Eritrean soldiers going door to door through the town. They particularly targeted young men and boys, prevented people from burying the dead, and then looted the town of everything of value, including food. Some commentators have said that food is being used as a weapon of war. In January, over 40 people were massacred at Debre Abbey. 300 people were killed in the attack on the Hitsats refugee camp. 300 people. At a village near Samra, 500 buildings were set on fire and 60 people are thought to have been killed. At a village called Bora, an estimated 100 people were murdered. Emaciated and starving people displaced by the violence are pouring into overcrowded towns. The Norwegian Refugee Council says 37,000 people have recently arrived at Shiraro, a town in northwestern Tigray where food, water and medicine are running out fast. The situation in Shiraro is beyond dire, the NRC chief Jan Egeland has warned. There are many parts of Tigray, particularly rural areas, where there is no communication and grave fears about the fate of local people, both in terms of violence and access to food, medicine and essential services. What is clear from both social media and independent reporting is that civilians have been targeted because of their ethnicity, because they are Tigrayan. Footage has been circulating of men in Ethiopian military uniforms speaking in Amharic, shouting abuse at groups of boys while shooting them and throwing their bodies over a cliff. And along with this has been the vandalising of symbols of Tigrayan culture, most notably Debre Damo Monastery and the Al-Najasi Mosque, one of the oldest in Africa. As the International Development Committee heard last week, economic and service infrastructure has been damaged, with factories looted and vandalised and banks closed, making it hard for humanitarian agencies to operate. The committee also heard about the destruction of health facilities, the result of systematic looting and vandalism by Eritrean and Ethiopian forces. Second, I want to talk about the widespread use of rape and sexual violence. It has been estimated that 10,000 women in Tigray have been raped, and recent reports on Channel 4, the BBC and CNN have all documented the horrific nature of the attacks, including kidnapping, imprisonment, rape and mutilation. On Monday of this week, an unprecedented letter signed by 12 leading figures in the international community called for the sexual violence to stop. They said there is only one medical facility in the whole region fully equipped to meet the survivors' needs. What especially stands out are the ferocity of the attacks. This is evidence from reports and photographs of injuries to women, including the mutilation of women's genitals. The targeting of women because they are Tigrayan. The rapists have talked of Amharanizing the women and purifying their blood. The use of rape as a weapon of war is always abhorrent and heinous, but for soldiers to claim to be purifying or cleansing women by raping them makes this violence look genocidal. And what also stands out is the impunity. There is no indication that either the Ethiopian or Eritrean governments are taking any steps whatsoever to rein in their troops. Those responsible for the sexual violence do so with complete impunity. On Tuesday, the Ethiopian government admitted there had been sexual assaults on women in Tigray, but sought to justify it as a consequence of the conflict. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in 2008, the UN Security Council unanimously approved Resolution 1820, which demands the immediate and complete cessation by all parties to armed conflict of all acts of sexual violence against civilians, and says they should immediately take appropriate measures to protect civilians, including women and girls, from all forms of sexual violence, including enforcing appropriate military disciplinary measures and upholding the principle of command responsibility. And it further goes on to say that rape and all other forms of sexual violence can constitute a war crime, a crime against humanity, or a constitutive act with respect to genocide. This is tough and unequivocal language. The UK has the privilege of being a permanent member of the UN Security Council and has a responsibility to ensure this resolution is enforced. It was Lord Hague of Richmond, then Foreign Secretary, who campaigned alongside Angelina Jolie against the use of sexual violence in war and received an award for his efforts from the then US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Now is the time for the Conservative government to prove that this was more than a publicity stunt. That brings me to my third and final point, the lack of response from the international community. The European Union, Germany and the United States paused their aid to Ethiopia, and the US administration last week sent the respected Senator Coons of Delaware to Addis Ababa. Ireland has led moves for the EU to apply targeted sanctions. However, the rest of the world has done little more than talk, and the governments of Ethiopia and Eritrea have turned a deaf ear. What is needed is not more words, but action. So I'm asking the Minister for action on the following points. The Ethiopia Country Programme is the biggest UK bilateral aid programme, as the Minister stressed at the International Development Select Committee last week. Will Her Majesty's Government align its policies with the UK's international partners, the US, EU and Germany, and pause the parts of its aid programme which are going to the Ethiopian Government? Will Her Majesty's Government support the moves to set up an independent UN investigation into the massacres of civilians in Tigray, including those at Mai Kadra, Axum and Samre, the targeting of refugee camps, including those at Hitsats and Shemelba? Will Her Majesty's Government do this urgently before evidence, including of survivors at massacre sites and rape victims from hospitals in Mekelle, is removed or destroyed? Will the Government introduce targeted sanctions against those in Ethiopia and Eritrea responsible for the atrocities in Tigray, following the approach taken by the European Union? Will the Government continue to ensure that the UN Security Council remains actively engaged to end the war in Tigray with the abuses associated with it? Will they press for the immediate withdrawal of Eritrean troops? and also seek to ensure there is an inclusive national dialogue in the country, as many Tigrayans have been calling for, to secure a lasting peace? Will the government specifically ensure that the evidence of widespread use of rape and sexual violence in the Tigray conflict is collated and the perpetrators brought to justice in line with UN Security Council Resolution 1820? It is wholly unacceptable that soldiers from the Ethiopian and Eritrean armies should be able to rape women with impunity. And it is equally unacceptable that their commanders-in-chief should permit their forces to use rape as a weapon of war or fail to bring justice to those under their command who commit such a crime. Will the government take steps to publicly support the US administration's initiatives to ensure that immediate and full access is provided to humanitarian agencies in Tigray, and that unfettered access will be provided for local and international journalists without repercussions for their translators and fixers? The Right Honourable Member for Esher and Walton, the Foreign Secretary, has spoken of his experience in taking war criminals to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Will the Minister therefore press him to take initial steps through the UN Security Council to bring prosecutions against those whom the evidence points to being responsible for war crimes in Tigray, including the use of rape? Mr Deputy Speaker, the effects of this war will continue long after the guns have fallen silent. There will be empty spaces where civilian populations were murdered, and there will be a cohort of children growing up who are the result of the rape of their mothers. This further illustrates why this is absolutely the wrong time for the UK government to be reneging on its promise to maintain UK aid spending at 0.7% of GNI, and I hope the Minister will also reflect further on this disastrous decision. Yet even now, the UK government can help avert yet more destruction in Tigray and can provide justice for the survivors of the massacres and for the women who have been raped. It will, however, take much more than words. It will take action, and that is what I and many others hope the Minister will commit to tonight.
Minister.